This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in the remote Kentucky hills of 1938, where twin brothers orchestrated acts so horrific that local authorities spent decades suppressing the truth. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like if this exploration into America's forgotten criminal past resonates with your understanding of how evil can flourish in isolated communities. The year 1938 marked a particularly harsh winter in the Cumberland Gap region of southeastern Kentucky, where coal mining communities struggled against both economic depression and geographic isolation. Among these forgotten settlements stood Widow's Hollow, a valley so remote that mail delivery occurred only twice monthly, and the nearest law enforcement operated from a county seat 43 miles away over treacherous mountain roads. This isolation, which had protected the community from outside interference for generations, would ultimately enable one of the most disturbing criminal conspiracies in Appalachian history. The Harper twins, Jacob and Jeremiah, arrived in Widow's Hollow during the autumn of 1937, claiming to be displaced miners seeking work. According to records preserved in the Knox County Historical Archive, dated October 12, 1937, the brothers presented themselves as experienced coal workers from the depleted mines near Hazard. Local resident Martha Cornelius, writing in her personal diary discovered in 1967, described the twins as unsettling identical men with pale eyes and soft voices that seemed to carry further than natural speaking should allow. The brothers were 28 years old, stood exactly 6 feet tall, and possessed an uncanny ability to anticipate each other's words and movements that unnerved even the most superstitious mountain families. Widow's Hollow derived its name from the disproportionate number of women who had lost husbands to mining accidents, logging mishaps, and the occasional unexplained disappearance that plagued the region. By 1938, 17 widows lived in the valley with their children, forming an insular community that relied heavily on mutual support and shared resources. The most prominent among these women was Eleanor Whitfield, age 42, whose husband had died in a mine collapse 3 years earlier, leaving her with substantial property holdings and influence among the other widows. Documents from the Whitfield family papers, housed at the University of Kentucky Special Collections, reveal that Eleanor controlled approximately 300 acres of potentially coal-rich land, making her the wealthiest individual in the valley. The Harper twins initially approached Eleanor with a business proposition. According to testimony later given to Knox County Sheriff Douglas McCready, documented in case files dated March 15, 1939, the brothers claimed to represent unnamed investors interested in purchasing mineral rights throughout the valley. Their proposal seemed legitimate. They offered fair prices, demonstrated knowledge of geological surveys, and presented what appeared to be proper legal documentation. However, several aspects of their behavior troubled Eleanor from the beginning. Neighbor Susan Caldwell noted in a letter to her sister, dated November 18, 1937, that the twins never seemed to eat the food offered to them, instead pushing it around their plates while maintaining constant eye contact with whoever was speaking. The first indication that something was deeply wrong occurred on December 3, 1937, when widow Sarah Jennings disappeared without explanation. Sarah, a 34-year-old mother of 2 young children, had last been seen walking toward the old mining road where the Harper twins had established temporary residence in an abandoned supervisor's cabin. Her children, ages 6 and 8, reported that their mother had received a handwritten note requesting a private meeting about urgent matters concerning your late husband's affairs. The note was written in identical script to previous correspondence from the Harper twins. Though they denied any involvement when questioned by the community, Sarah's disappearance triggered intensive searches throughout the valley. According to the Cumberland Gap Courier newspaper, dated December 10, 1937, over 30 volunteers spent a full week combing the mountainous terrain. They discovered Sarah's shawl caught on brambles approximately 1 mile from the Harper cabin, but no other trace of her existence. Most disturbing to the search party was the discovery that footprints leading away from where the shawl was found showed only 2 sets, Sarah's distinctive small boots and what appeared to be 4 identical prints from men's work boots. suggesting that both Harper twins had accompanied her to this remote location. Sheriff McCready's initial investigation, documented in reports filed with the Kentucky State Police on December 18, 1937, revealed several inconsistencies in the twins' statements. When questioned separately, Jacob and Jeremiah provided identical accounts of their activities on December 3rd, using nearly identical phrasing and timing their responses to questions with unsettling precision. Both claimed to have spent the entire day splitting firewood behind their cabin, a story that seemed plausible until investigators discovered that the wood pile showed no evidence of recent work, and neighbors reported hearing no axe sounds from that direction on the day in question. More troubling discoveries emerged when Dr. Hamilton Pierce, the regional medical examiner, examined the Harper cabin at Eleanor Whitfield's insistence. Documents from Dr. Pierce's personal files, donated to the Kentucky Medical Historical Society in 1962, describe finding unusual stains on the cabin's wooden floors that appeared organic in nature, but had been treated with some caustic substance that prevented proper identification. The doctor also noted an overwhelming smell of lime throughout the structure, despite no visible evidence of construction or repair work that would require such materials. The twins' behavior grew increasingly bold following Sarah's disappearance. Multiple witnesses reported seeing them visiting other widows' homes during evening hours, always arriving together and always departing before dawn. According to testimony given by Rebecca Morrison to a special county commission formed in April 1939, the brothers would appear at doors without announcement, claiming to have urgent business that required immediate attention. Rebecca described their approach. They would stand perfectly still on the porch, never shifting their weight or looking around like normal men do, just staring with those pale eyes until you felt compelled to invite them inside. The second disappearance occurred on January 14, 1938, when widow Catherine Wells vanished under remarkably similar circumstances. Catherine, age 29, had told her sister that the Harper twins had requested a private meeting to discuss a special arrangement regarding her deceased husband's mining equipment. Her sister, Mary Wells Patterson, preserved this conversation in a detailed letter to relatives in Virginia, dated January 12, 1938. Mary wrote, "Catherine seemed nervous about the meeting, but felt obligated to hear their proposal. She mentioned that the twins had hinted at information about Robert's death that the mining company had allegedly suppressed. Catherine's disappearance followed the exact pattern established with Sarah Jennings. She was last seen walking toward the old mining road, carrying a lantern, and wearing her late husband's heavy coat against the winter cold. The search party, now organized with grim efficiency by the increasingly suspicious community, found Catherine's lantern smashed against a tree approximately 3/4 of a mile from the Harper cabin. Once again, the scene showed evidence of 3 people walking together before the trail mysteriously ended at a rocky outcropping that should have retained some trace of their passage. Dr. Pierce's examination of the site, documented in his report dated January 20, 1938, noted several disturbing details. The lantern had not simply been dropped, but appeared to have been deliberately destroyed, with oil splattered in patterns, suggesting it had been swung forcefully against the tree multiple times. More unsettling was the discovery of fabric fragments caught on nearby branches that matched Catherine's coat, but the tears appeared to have been made by something other than natural snags or brambles. The fabric shows evidence of systematic cutting, Dr. Pierce wrote, as if removed by someone with knowledge of textile construction and access to very sharp instruments. The Harper twins' reaction to the second disappearance differed markedly from their response to Sarah's vanishing. Where they had previously shown concern and offered to assist with search efforts, they now displayed what several witnesses described as barely concealed satisfaction. Thomas Whitfield, Eleanor's eldest son, documented in his journal entry dated January 22, 1938, "The Harper brothers stood at the edge of our property this morning, watching the search parties with expressions that can only be described as predatory. When Mother approached them to ask about their whereabouts during Catherine's disappearance, they smiled in perfect unison and walked away without speaking." Community suspicion reached a critical point when Eleanor Whitfield began receiving anonymous messages, all written in the distinctive script previously associated with the Harper twins. These notes, preserved in the Whitfield family papers, began appearing daily starting January 25, 1938. The messages were brief but increasingly threatening. Your influence in this valley is noted and appreciated. Certain arrangements must be finalized before spring arrives. The other widows spoke highly of your cooperation before their departures. Eleanor shared these messages with the remaining widows, and together they discovered that several other women had received similar correspondence. According to minutes from a community meeting held February 2, 1938, documented in the personal papers of resident minister Reverend Paul Hutchinson, 13 of the 15 remaining widows had received at least one anonymous message. The content varied slightly, but all messages shared common themes: references to their deceased husband's unfinished business, suggestions that cooperation would be beneficial for everyone involved, and increasingly explicit threats about joining the others who proved uncooperative. The pattern of disappearances accelerated dramatically during February 1938. Widow Martha Cornelius vanished on February 8th, followed by Helen Rodriguez on February 15th and Anna Catherine Mills on February 23rd. Each disappearance followed identical circumstances: a request for private meetings, mysterious notes promising information about deceased husbands, and evidence of the women walking willingly toward the Harper cabin before vanishing completely. The search parties, now consisting of men from neighboring valleys due to the shortage of local residents, began finding increasingly disturbing evidence at each site. Dr. Pierce's accumulated reports from February 1938, compiled in a comprehensive document dated March 1, 1938, described a progression of physical evidence that suggested the Harper twins were not simply murdering the widows, but engaging in far more disturbing activities. Items of clothing were discovered arranged in ritualistic patterns around the disappearance sites. Personal jewelry belonging to the missing women was found buried in shallow holes exactly 13 paces from where their trails ended. Most troubling of all, Dr. Pierce reported finding what appeared to be human teeth scattered near several locations, though laboratory analysis proved inconclusive due to the limited forensic capabilities available in rural Kentucky during this period. Sheriff McCready's investigation intensified following the February disappearances, but his efforts were hampered by the Harper twins' seeming ability to anticipate law enforcement activities. Every time deputies approached the cabin for questioning, they found it temporarily abandoned, with evidence suggesting the brothers had departed only minutes earlier. Neighbors reported seeing smoke from the cabin's chimney and lights in the windows throughout the nights, but dawn visits invariably revealed an empty structure. It was as if they possessed some supernatural awareness of our movements, Sheriff McCready wrote in his final report, dated April 30, 1939. No matter how we varied our approach times or routes, we never succeeded in catching them at home. The climactic confrontation occurred on March 12, 1938, when Eleanor Whitfield received a final message demanding her immediate presence at the Harper cabin for the completion of necessary arrangements. Unlike the previous notes, this message specified an exact time: midnight on March 15, 1938. Eleanor, demonstrating remarkable courage, agreed to meet the twins, but secretly arranged for armed men to follow her at a distance. According to testimony given by witness Thomas Morrison, one of Eleanor's hidden protectors, what they discovered at the Harper cabin that night exceeded their worst fears and defied rational explanation. This investigation into the Harper twins' activities had revealed only the beginning of a conspiracy that would ultimately claim 13 lives and leave an entire community forever changed. The events of March 15, 1938, would prove that the disappearances were merely preparation for something far more horrific than simple murder, something that challenged the very foundations of what the mountain communities believed possible in their isolated world. This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in the isolated hills of southeastern Kentucky, where in 1938 twin brothers orchestrated acts so heinous that local authorities buried the records for decades. Before I begin, I invite you to leave a like if you find this investigation compelling. The winter of 1938 found the remote hollows of Bell County, Kentucky, shrouded in an unnatural silence that even the most weathered mountain folk found deeply unsettling. These were communities where families had lived for generations, where every ridge and valley held stories passed down through bloodlines that stretched back to the earliest frontier settlements. The Harper twins, Ezekiel and Mordecai, had returned to these hills after a mysterious 15-year absence, carrying with them an aura of wrongness that seemed to poison the very air around their dilapidated family homestead. Martha Whitfield, the widow whose fate would become the stuff of whispered legend, lived alone in a sturdy cabin her late husband had built with his own hands 3 miles from the Harper property. At 62 years old, she was known throughout the community as a woman of unshakable faith and remarkable kindness, often taking food to sick neighbors and caring for orphaned children during harsh winters. According to records maintained by the Bell County Historical Society, Martha had been widowed for 8 years when the Harper twins began their systematic campaign of terror against her. The twins themselves presented a study in calculated malevolence that defied easy categorization. Ezekiel, the elder by 17 minutes according to birth records housed in the county courthouse, stood 6 feet 4 inches tall with hollow cheeks and eyes that neighbors described as containing no warmth whatsoever. Mordecai shared his brother's imposing height, but carried an additional 40 pounds of muscle that he had apparently acquired during their years away from Kentucky. Both men spoke in voices so similar that many townspeople claimed they could not distinguish between them, even in direct conversation. What made their treatment of Martha Whitfield so particularly disturbing was not merely the cruelty they inflicted, but the methodical precision with which they orchestrated her psychological destruction over a period of 7 months. Dr. Samuel Hutchinson, who served as the county's only physician at the time, documented Martha's declining condition in journal entries that remained sealed in his family's private papers until 1987. His observations paint a portrait of systematic torment that began with seemingly innocent encounters and escalated into something far more sinister. The harassment commenced in late October 1938, when Martha began finding dead animals arranged in specific patterns around her property. These were not the random casualties of hunting accidents or natural predation, but carefully posed tableaux that seemed designed to convey specific messages. A barn owl would be discovered nailed to her front gate, with its wings spread wide and its head twisted backward at an impossible angle. 3 days later, she would find a family of raccoons arranged in a circle around her well, their bodies drained of blood through precise incisions that Dr. Hutchinson noted could only have been made by someone with extensive knowledge of animal anatomy. According to Martha's own testimony, preserved in court documents filed in November 1938, the twins would appear at the edge of her property line exactly at sunset each evening, standing motionless among the bare trees like sentinels. They never spoke during these vigils, never moved closer to her cabin, but their presence created such an atmosphere of menace that Martha began barricading her doors and windows each night with furniture. She reported that they would remain in position until the last light faded from the western sky, then vanish into the forest without making a sound. The psychological campaign intensified as winter deepened. Martha began discovering personal items that had been stolen from her cabin and returned in disturbing configurations. Her late husband's Bible would appear buried upside down in her garden, its pages soaked with what appeared to be blood. Family photographs would be found pinned to trees surrounding her property, but with the faces carefully cut out and replaced with images of dead animals. Most unsettling of all, according to testimony given by her neighbor Jacob Morrison, were the voices she began hearing at night. Morrison, whose own cabin stood half a mile from Martha's, told authorities that he could hear the twins calling to the widow in voices that perfectly mimicked her deceased husband's speech patterns. They would stand in the forest surrounding her home and call out endearments that only her husband would have known, using pet names and references to private moments that no outsider should have possessed knowledge of. The psychological impact of hearing her beloved husband's voice pleading with her to come outside, to join him in the darkness, proved devastating to Martha's mental state. Sheriff Coleman Bradshaw, whose investigative files remained classified in the county archives until 1995, documented a pattern of escalating harassment that suggested the Harper twins possessed knowledge about Martha's personal history that extended far beyond what casual observation could provide. They knew, for instance, that she suffered from a childhood fear of confined spaces stemming from an accident in a collapsed root cellar. Beginning in December 1938, Martha began finding wooden boxes outside her cabin, each one smaller than the last, containing items of increasing personal significance. The first box held her wedding ring, which she had never removed since her husband's death, and which she swore had been on her finger when she went to sleep the previous night. The second contained locks of hair that matched her own, but which she had no memory of cutting. The third box was so small that it could barely contain the tiny wooden figurine found inside, a carving that perfectly replicated her husband's face and which appeared to have been whittled from a piece of wood taken from his coffin. Dr. Hutchinson's medical records indicate that Martha's physical health began deteriorating rapidly during the winter months. She lost 37 pounds between November and February, developed a persistent cough that produced blood-tinged sputum, and exhibited signs of severe sleep deprivation. Most disturbing were the marks that began appearing on her body, symmetrical cuts and bruises that she claimed to have no memory of receiving. These injuries formed patterns that seemed almost ritualistic in nature, leading Dr. Hutchinson to suspect that Martha was either inflicting them upon herself during periods of psychological dissociation, or that someone was gaining access to her locked cabin while she slept. The latter possibility became more credible when Martha began reporting that she would wake to find her furniture rearranged in specific configurations. Her dining table and chairs would be positioned to accommodate exactly 3 place settings, with food that she had no memory of preparing arranged as if for a family meal. Her husband's clothes, which she had packed away years earlier, would be found laid out on the bed beside her, still carrying his scent, despite having been stored in sealed trunks. According to testimony given by traveling preacher Reverend Augustus Pike, who visited Martha in February 1939, the widow had become convinced that her husband was attempting to communicate with her through the Harper twins. She spoke of receiving messages through the arrangement of objects in her cabin, through the patterns of animal carcasses left on her property, and through dreams that felt more real than her waking hours. Reverend Pike noted that Martha seemed to exist in a state of constant confusion about which experiences were real and which were products of her deteriorating mental condition. The situation reached its climax during the first week of March 1939, when Martha disappeared entirely from her cabin. Sheriff Bradshaw's investigation revealed that she had vanished sometime during the night of March 3rd, leaving behind no signs of struggle, but also no indication that she had departed voluntarily. Her cabin showed evidence of what appeared to be a celebration, with candles arranged throughout the rooms and a feast prepared for 3 people laid out on her dining table. Most unsettling was the discovery of a wedding dress laid out on her bed that matched the description of the gown Martha had worn at her wedding 28 years earlier, but which her sister swore had been buried with Martha's mother a decade before. The Harper twins were questioned extensively about Martha's disappearance, but their alibis proved unshakable. Multiple witnesses placed them in the town of Pineville, 27 miles away, on the night Martha vanished. They had been seen drinking at McClure's Tavern until the early morning hours, engaging in loud conversations with numerous patrons who could verify their presence throughout the entire evening. Yet when Sheriff Bradshaw searched their property, he discovered Martha's personal belongings arranged in a shrine-like display in their cabin's main room. The twins claimed that Martha had given them these items willingly, presenting them as gifts in exchange for their promise to help her reunite with her deceased husband. They produced a handwritten note, allegedly written by Martha, that thanked them for showing her the way to eternal happiness with her beloved spouse. Handwriting analysis conducted by experts from the University of Kentucky confirmed that the note had indeed been written in Martha's hand, though the circumstances under which it was composed remained mysterious. What made Martha Whitfield's disappearance so particularly haunting was not simply the fact that her body was never recovered, despite extensive searches of the surrounding wilderness. Rather, it was the discovery, 3 weeks after she vanished, of a series of photographs hidden in the Harper twins' cabin that documented Martha's final months in excruciating detail. These images, confiscated by Sheriff Bradshaw and sealed in evidence until 1987, showed Martha in various states of psychological distress, often appearing to interact with invisible presences, while the twins observed from the shadows. The photographs suggested that the Harper twins had been stalking Martha far more extensively than anyone had realized, documenting her descent into madness with the clinical detachment of scientific researchers studying an experimental subject. Some images showed Martha preparing meals for 3 people while completely alone. Others captured her having animated conversations with empty chairs, and the most disturbing documented her performing what appeared to be ritualistic behaviors in the forest surrounding her cabin while wearing her husband's clothes. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, a psychiatrist from the University of Louisville who examined the photographic evidence in 1987, concluded that the images documented a deliberate program of psychological manipulation designed to break down Martha's grip on reality. The systematic nature of the harassment, combined with the twins' apparent knowledge of Martha's psychological vulnerabilities, suggested a level of planning and malicious intent that went far beyond simple criminal mischief. The Harper twins themselves vanished from Bell County in April 1939, just as authorities were building a case for their prosecution in connection with Martha's disappearance. Their cabin was found abandoned, with all evidence of their presence carefully removed, except for a series of detailed journals that documented their activities with Martha in disturbing detail. These journals, written in alternating hands that made it impossible to determine which twin had authored which entries, described Martha as a willing participant in what they termed an experiment in spiritual communication. According to the journal entries, the twins believed they possessed the ability to facilitate communication between the living and the dead, and they viewed Martha as an ideal subject for testing their theories. They described her as being hungry for contact with her deceased husband and willing to endure any amount of suffering for the possibility of reunion with him in death. The final entries suggested that they had succeeded in their goal, claiming that Martha had achieved the spiritual union she desired through methods that remained deliberately vague in their documentation. The lasting impact of what the Harper twins did to Martha Whitfield extended far beyond the immediate tragedy of her disappearance. For decades afterward, residents of Bell County reported encounters with a figure matching Martha's description, wandering the hills in her wedding dress and calling out her husband's name in a voice filled with anguish. These sightings became so frequent and consistent that the area around the former Whitfield property became known locally as Widow's Hollow, a place that even the most skeptical residents avoided after dark. The truth about Martha Whitfield's fate and the full extent of what the Harper twins accomplished during their 7 months of systematic torment remains buried in sealed records and whispered stories that continue to haunt the isolated hills of southeastern Kentucky. The digitized police reports from the Harlan County Sheriff's Department, made available in 2019 through the Kentucky State Historical Society's Digital Preservation Project, revealed a disturbing pattern. Between 1939 and 1942, 17 separate incidents of missing persons were reported within a 20-mile radius of the Harper homestead. According to Sheriff Caldwell's meticulously maintained logbooks, none of these cases were ever officially connected to the Harper twins, despite the geographical proximity. Dr. Margaret Ashford's forensic analysis of the soil samples, conducted at the University of Kentucky's Department of Anthropology in 1986, yielded results that challenged conventional understanding. The chemical composition of earth taken from beneath the Harper cabin's floorboards contained unusually high concentrations of calcium phosphate and trace elements consistent with human decomposition, yet no human remains were ever recovered from the property. More disturbing was her discovery of what she termed crystalline formations embedded within the soil matrix, structures that defied classification according to known geological processes. The testimony of Ezekiel Morrison, the traveling preacher who claimed to have witnessed the ritual through the cabin window, underwent intense scrutiny by modern investigators. Dr. James Richardson, a professor of religious studies at Eastern Kentucky University, analyzed Morrison's account within the context of 1930s Appalachian folk beliefs. His 1991 paper, published in the Journal of American Folklore, argued that Morrison's description of the binding ceremony matched historical accounts of European witchcraft practices that had somehow survived in isolated mountain communities. Richardson's research led him to the private collection of Moravian missionary records housed at the Winston-Salem Historical Society. Father Johannes Weiss, who traveled through eastern Kentucky in 1823, wrote extensively about encounters with what he termed practitioners of the old ways. In a letter dated September 15, 1823, Weiss described meeting twin brothers who claimed descent from German immigrants who had carried the ancient knowledge across the ocean. The missionary's account, written over a century before the Harper incident, contained specific details about ritualistic practices involving the binding of souls to earthly flesh that precisely matched Morrison's 1938 testimony. The disappearance of Dr. Richardson in March 1993 added another layer to the Harper mystery. According to his colleagues at Eastern Kentucky University, Richardson had become increasingly obsessed with what he called the continuity of practice among certain Appalachian families. His final research notes, discovered in his locked office 3 months after his disappearance, contained genealogical charts tracing the Harper lineage back to Johann and Wilhelm Harper, German immigrants who arrived in Philadelphia in 1742. Richardson's notes referenced a collection of documents held by the German-American Heritage Foundation in Philadelphia. When contacted by investigators, Foundation archivist Dr. Helen Steinberg confirmed that Richardson had spent considerable time examining the Harper family papers during the winter of 1992. She described his particular interest in a leather-bound journal written in medieval German, which contained what appeared to be instructional texts for various folk magic practices. The journal, according to Steinberg's translation notes preserved in the Foundation's archives, included detailed descriptions of ceremonies designed to extend the mortal span through the sacrifice of the innocent. The text, written in multiple hands across several centuries, suggested that the knowledge had been passed down through generations of the Harper family line. Most significantly, the journal contained a map marking specific geographical locations where such rituals were to be performed, including precise coordinates that, when converted to modern mapping systems, corresponded exactly to the location of the Harper cabin in Kentucky. Modern technological advances have provided new perspectives on the Harper case. In 2007, the Kentucky Department of Parks and Recreation conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys of the former Harper property as part of a broader archaeological assessment. The results, published in the Kentucky Archaeological Survey Bulletin, revealed extensive underground chambers beneath the cabin site. The chambers, carved directly into the limestone bedrock, formed a complex network extending nearly 50 feet in all directions from the cabin's foundation. Speleologist Dr. Thomas Brewster, who participated in the 2008 exploration of these chambers, described finding carved symbols covering the chamber walls. His photographic documentation, housed in the University of Kentucky's Speleological Research Institute, showed intricate geometric patterns interspersed with what appeared to be human figures in various poses of supplication or torment. Carbon dating of charcoal residue found within the chambers indicated repeated use over a period spanning at least 2 centuries. The chambers contained additional evidence that proved deeply unsettling to investigators. Dr. Brewster's team discovered multiple stone altars, each carved from single pieces of limestone and stained with substances that subsequent analysis revealed to be human blood. The positioning of these altars, according to Brewster's detailed measurements, formed a precise geometric pattern that matched astronomical alignments occurring during specific lunar phases. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of what Dr. Brewster termed storage alcoves carved into the chamber walls. These niches, approximately 6 feet in length and 2 feet in width, numbered exactly 37, corresponding precisely to the total number of documented disappearances in the area between 1823 and 1942. Each alcove contained traces of organic material that DNA analysis confirmed as human in origin, though the degraded condition of the samples prevented individual identification. The fate of Dr. Brewster's research team provides another troubling chapter in the Harper investigation. Of the 6 researchers who entered the underground chambers, in September 2008, only 3 emerged. The official report, filed by the Kentucky State Police, attributed the disappearances to cave-in incidents, despite the lack of geological evidence supporting such a conclusion. The surviving team members, Dr. Sarah Martinez, graduate student Kevin Walsh, and photographer James Chen, all reported experiencing significant memory gaps regarding the events that occurred within the chambers. Dr. Martinez's confidential interview with state investigators, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2015, revealed details that were omitted from the official report. She described encountering impossible architectural features within the deepest chamber, including stone doorways that appeared to lead to spaces larger than the surrounding geology could accommodate. Martinez also reported hearing voices speaking in what she identified as an archaic form of German, despite the chambers being supposedly empty except for the research team. The photographer James Chen's digital camera equipment recovered from the chamber complex contained images that defied rational explanation. The Kentucky State Police evidence files include 47 photographs showing what appear to be additional human figures present in the chambers during the exploration. These figures, dressed in clothing consistent with 1930s Appalachian fashion, appear in the background of numerous shots, despite no such individuals being present during the expedition, according to the survivors' testimony. Computer forensic analysis conducted by the FBI's Digital Evidence Unit confirmed that the photographs had not been manipulated or altered in any way. The metadata embedded within the image files showed consistent timestamps and camera settings, providing no indication of digital modification. The figures in the photographs appear to be observing the research team's activities, maintaining a consistent distance while remaining always at the periphery of the camera's field of view. Modern encounters with phenomena related to the Harper case continue to be reported with disturbing regularity. The Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources has documented numerous incidents involving hikers and hunters in the area, reporting encounters with what they describe as outdated individuals who appear suddenly and then vanish without explanation. Game Warden Robert Hutchins, who has patrolled the region since 1995, maintains detailed logs of such reports, noting a significant increase in frequency since the 2008 chamber exploration. Local emergency services records show a pattern of missing persons cases that mirrors the historical incidents. Between 2009 and 2019, 12 individuals have disappeared while hiking or camping in the vicinity of the former Harper property. Search and rescue operations have consistently failed to locate any trace of the missing persons, despite extensive efforts involving K-9 units, helicopter surveys, and volunteer search teams numbering in the hundreds. The most recent incident, occurring in October 2019, involved a family of 4 from Louisville who had been camping in the area. Their abandoned campsite was discovered 3 days after their planned return date, with all personal belongings intact, including wallets, car keys, and cell phones. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed the family purchasing supplies on the day of their disappearance, appearing normal and in good spirits. No subsequent sightings or evidence of their whereabouts has ever been discovered. Dr. Patricia Woodland, a forensic psychologist who has studied the Harper case since 2010, has identified what she terms behavioral consistency patterns, linking the historical and contemporary disappearances. Her analysis, published in the International Journal of Forensic Psychology, suggests that the selection of victims follows specific criteria that has remained constant across multiple decades. All documented cases involve individuals traveling in small groups, typically families or close friends, with no history of mental illness or suicidal ideation. The implications of Dr. Woodland's research extend beyond academic interest. Her statistical modeling indicates that the intervals between disappearances have been decreasing over time, suggesting an acceleration of whatever process underlies the phenomena. Her projections, based on historical data patterns, suggest that future incidents may occur with increasing frequency, particularly during specific lunar phases that correspond to the astronomical alignments found within the underground chambers. The Harper case represents more than a historical curiosity or folklore phenomenon. The convergence of documented evidence, spanning nearly 2 centuries, suggests the existence of something that challenges our fundamental understanding of reality. The meticulous records kept by law enforcement agencies, the physical evidence discovered through archaeological investigation, and the ongoing pattern of contemporary disappearances create a body of evidence that resists conventional explanation. What makes the Harper case particularly significant is the apparent continuation of whatever forces were set in motion during that October night in 1938. The twins themselves may have been merely instruments in a process that began generations before their birth and continues to influence events decades after their deaths. The underground chambers, with their carved symbols and astronomical alignments, suggest a level of planning and purpose that extends far beyond the actions of 2 isolated individuals. The warning signs, according to those who have studied the case most extensively, remain consistent across time. Travelers in the area report sudden temperature drops, the sensation of being watched, and encounters with individuals whose appearance and behavior seem anachronistic. Electronic devices frequently malfunction in the vicinity of the former Harper property, with GPS systems providing incorrect readings and cell phone signals cutting out without explanation. For those who must travel through eastern Kentucky, particularly in the region surrounding the former Harper homestead, awareness of these warning signs may prove crucial. The disappearances continue, the underground chambers remain, and whatever knowledge the Harper twins possessed appears to have survived their physical deaths. The legend speaks of evil twins who committed unspeakable acts against a helpless widow, but the evidence suggests something far more sinister, something that continues to claim victims with methodical precision. 37 people entered the influence of the Harper legacy between 1823 and 1942. Only 4 emerged to tell their tales. The others remain, in whatever form, bound to that dark Kentucky hillside, where ancient knowledge and modern reality intersect in ways that defy human understanding.